Welcome back to the show as China celebrates its New Year, also known as the Spring Festival. Let's get back to our guests in the studio and in other places. Sean, let me start with you again. China, in the last 40 years, has gone through immense change, reform and opening up. It's changed the country, changed its people. We see an increase in urbanization. And often when these things happen, traditions tend to get lost in the mix. Are younger generations in China keeping up with these traditions?
Well, I think you can definitely see a change in the way how young people are now celebrating the Chinese New Year, the Spring Festival. But some of the traditions stay. For example, no matter how rapid the Chinese urbanization process is unfolding, young people working in Beijing and Shanghai and Shenzhen, all these so-called Tier 1 cities, still feel the urge of going back to their hometowns to celebrate Chinese New Year's with their families and with their parents and grandparents. But in the same time, you also see younger generation, especially the ones that are living in urban areas in big cities. They sometimes choose to spend Spring Festival overseas. They travel to the United States, they travel to Southeast Asia, to Europe, just to avoid the crowd that's building up in China. So I think you can definitely see different ways of celebrating the Chinese New Year, but the tradition, the culture is here to stay.
Now, have you ever experienced that yourself, traveling through China at this time of year?
Yes. When I go back to China, which I do a lot and quite often, you can definitely see that friends are celebrating the Chinese New Year differently than before, because these days people are so spread out. They work in different cities, their parents are moving to different cities, and a lot of Chinese parents are actually now the main driving forces behind overseas tourism. People who have retired and now they're deciding to spend Spring Festival in Thailand, in Singapore, in Europe. So you can definitely see a lot of difference.
Now, you're a young guy, of course, with a young family. How would you be celebrating Chinese New Year here?
This year, I will be spending Chinese New Year with my family, with my wife in DC. But I'm hoping to go back right after the Chinese New Year to also spend a week with my parents.
So you'll miss all the crowds that way?
Yes.
Okay. Julie, for someone like you who's been away from China for years, tell us about your memories of this festival when you were a child in China, when you were growing up.
It was a great time, exciting time. I always as a child, I always was looking forward to this season because it means great food, great stories, and gathering with parents, my parents and friends with them, and visiting far family members. And that means great travel. You travel great distances. And also, you may stay up until very late, the whole night, actually, sometimes. And when you're a child, people like to give you money. They give you big banknotes wrapped in red envelopes. So those were the precious memories. And I love the stories I heard from my uncles, aunties. Those are the most cherished moments.
Right. Well, tell us about those stories. What did they tell you? And also, you mentioned the red envelopes. What's the significance of the red envelopes?
And to wrap money in red envelopes will bring you a lot of luck. So that's a wish from all the older generations to their children and grandchildren. So when you visit an extended family in the villages, especially, everybody gives you money.
Okay, Bill, when you look at an event like this, at a time when there's so many misunderstandings, when a time when there are tensions rising, would it help in the world if this event, like Chinese New Year, like the Spring Festival, became an even bigger global event?
I think it could help. I never want to overstate how cultural exchange can modify political or economic realities. But it certainly is a good thing for people to understand one another through the exchange of traditional cultures, heritage. It creates an understanding of what underlying values are in place that sustain a society or sustain a people. I mean, I think everything we've heard from your other guests today indicates how important the Spring Festival and New Year celebrations are to a sense of Chinese identity in China and around the world. It can only help if Americans and others know more about this important event.
Fanya, there are, of course, large Chinese communities in sort of new parts of the world, the new diaspora, if I could call that. Lots of Chinese now living in Africa, for instance. Any idea of how they celebrate this?
Well, I'm really excited to do some more research into that, but I believe food would definitely be on the agenda of celebration for Chinese living abroad. I would say perhaps some kind of festivities that involve lion dancing and dragon, that kind of performances that to display a sense of tradition. That's also quite common. I was actually talking to someone earlier that the Chinatown in DC, for example, would definitely have a parade every year. So I'd like to check that out.
Okay. Sean, of course, this is a very important year for China. The Year of the Pig will also mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China.
Yes.
So what else can we look forward to from China this year?
So in 2019, I think what you're looking at in terms of China's own development economically is facing enormous challenges, both external and internal. And I think President Xi Jinping has identified some of those challenges during his various speeches during the past couple of months. And for China and for Chinese culture, I think 2019 is also important because this is the year when China will really start to embark on some of the new promises of reform and opening up in the cultural space, in the economic space, in finance and trade. So I think this is a year that I hope would bring a lot of good fortune to China and to Asia in general.
And Bill Ivey, what are your thoughts on what we can expect from China this year? As I pointed out, it's an important year for the country.
Well, it is a great year of celebration, both political heritage and cultural heritage, and frankly, the achievements of China as a great emerging power around the world. It's also, I think, a time when everyone should work to enhance understanding, especially in times when political and economic forces can tend to push us apart. I think the cultural sector, traditional culture, the kinds of things folklore scholars are fascinated by, is very much the kind of knowledge that can help societies understand one another and sustain relationships, sustain good relationships more effectively.
And Sean, of course, we live in the age of social media. How does that expand our knowledge of what is happening in China? The Chinese, of course, very active on social media.
Well, I think the social media, both in the Western countries and in China, are sort of communicating some of the universal values in Chinese New Year across the globe. For example, people are posting pictures with their families, pictures with their friends, families gathering together, watching the New Year's gala. So I think those things are universal, and when they are communicated via social media, all over the world, I think it speaks to just how universal some of these values really are.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Happy New Year to all of you at this time. That's it for this edition of The Heat. Happy Chinese New Year. Thanks for joining us.